Hello and welcome to the final video of how to paint with Treescape, and we're going to be looking at doing the foreground to complete this painting. Now when I teach this in real life to my students, I normally approach this bit with, well, you know how to paint with acrylics now, this foreground is entirely up to you, and I leave them to it. So I just let them decide how they want to paint it. I think it's a good thing to do because it starts to release you from my instruction, so you don't have to really follow my process, and you can start to, with hopefully a little bit of confidence that you've built over the rest of the painting, really start to develop your own ideas and see what comes out if you're not overthinking it too much. So that would make this a very short video, but that is option one. So turn off now and just go for it. Use the same colours and maybe a purple. And in fact, that's going to be one of the things that you'll learn in this video. So there is some value here. But if you fancy just going hell for leather, then just go for it. Same colours, a little bit of purple, and just see what comes out and see what you create. Option two is to follow my other suggestion for how we complete the foreground. And the first thing I suggest that you do is get your pastel pencil ready again. I think it's a good idea to reassess the shapes in the foreground. Now we've got more of the painting completed, now we've got the rest of the painting completed, and to redraw any of the elements that you want to include in the foreground that perhaps you oversimplified or simplified previously. Or maybe you've come a bit further down and you need to reassess or reestablish where that horizon line is. So as I look at mine, I'm comparing it with the original photograph, and what I want to do is, whilst painting and whilst looking at this image, I saw that there was this lovely greenery, this sort of like low-level sapling. I suspect it's a little beech sapling with that lovely bright green coming out from the bottom of this beech tree. So I'm just going to sketch over some of the paint that I've already painted to show where that top of that lovely bright green line is. And there's also a little hint of it over here as well. Sort of does that sort of shape, and a few bits of sapling twigs coming out from the ground there. Okay, so let's just revisit some of the sketch lines here. I'm just going to refine that, make that a bit narrower. And there's a little bit more detail in this far distant area. But I don't want to get too fiddly-diddly because it's going to look strange with the rest of the painting. So I want to still keep those shapes big within that area. So let's just see, there's a, just behind that green, there's sort of a dark shape that does that. And then I get a light shape that does that, and the rest, that's mid-value. So that's all I'm going to do there. So that's really not only helped me in resketching and getting some elements in there that are going to help me, it's also helped me connect back to that area as well. And I think it's important that you sort of relook at things so you get a bit of an understanding or a little bit of confidence about where to start maybe, or how you're going to complete it. So the next thing, palette. There is an extra colour in this foreground, which is this lovely purpley, muted purple that we can see in some of the tips of the pale bracken, and we can also see on the pathway. So that's a new colour that I'm going to introduce to the palette. I don't want to introduce too many because I think it affects the balance of the painting. We've got Hansa Yellow Opaque, Jenkins Green, and Permanent Green Deep. Now this is the sky colour that's going to be useful. So this is the manganese blue. White, where would we be without white? Final colour, sorry, was Vivid Red Orange. Now we're going to introduce, drum roll please, a wonderful colour that you can only buy from Liquitex, or I've only found with Liquitex, because it's a mixed pigment, so it's something that they've created. So they have something called, and I don't work for Liquitex by the way, they have created a muted range, and there's I think 5 colours in the muted range, and one of them is muted grey, which is this lovely colour here, and this is like a muted purple. It's so useful, it's wonderful. Let me show you. This is muted purple. Look at that, it looks black, doesn't it? Let's add a little bit of white to it. And you can see that it goes this lovely muted grey purple. Now, if you haven't got that colour, then you could make it. So you could make it using a standard purple, something like a dioxazine purple, and adding a tiny weeny bit of yellow to it, because yellow is a complementary colour. It'll knock the stuffing out of it and you'll get a lovely grey purple. Anyway, I'm going to use that muted grey, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue into it occasionally when I use it. Let's start with the pathway, and I think the pathway is a good place to start in this foreground anyway, because it helps to set the scene, actually set the scene, so you know what scale you're working at, what's closest, what's mid-ground and what's furthest away. I'm going to change the process a little bit. So rather than working in layers, we're just going to do everything all at once. So that's going to be our slightly different process. So it's taking what we've done here and adding a ton of confidence to it. So rather than thinking, let's paint the blur, wait for it to dry, and then paint on top, let's try doing a little bit all at the same time. So I'm going to start off with the pathway, and I'm going to start off by using some of this magic muted grey. So let's just take a little bit of white. So a little bit of mixing, just for a few marks. And then let's start to, oh look at that. Now, as I put that down, I'm thinking it's a little purple. I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it, because I actually want to take some of the purple out of it. And just as we did before, I am mixing on the canvas a lot. So I started off with a little bit of a light muted grey, and then added a bit of blue, because the great thing about mixing on the canvas is that you can just put a colour on there without really thinking, and then you know that you've got time whilst it's still wet to adjust it. So remember, we are also creating contrast whilst we do this. So we're sort of working 2 layers at the same time. So I'm just going to clean my brush because I want to go into the green now. So I'm picking up a little bit of my permanent green deep, and and a little bit of yellow, and I'm just going to brush that into the edges. So I'm blending and mixing. But what I also want to do is, whilst on colour, let's get a little bit of the permanent green light, let's get a little bit of yellow, a little bit of white, make it nice and pale, and scribble it in. Got different textures down here, so I'm holding the brush at a distance and really pushing that paint in all lots of different directions. And whilst it's still wet, I'm going to lay in a little bit of orange as contrast, and that's going to be developing that layer much further than we did with the foliage above. Okay, I'm finding it easier working across because I'm keeping this edge wet, so I'm working now from the green just wipe my brush clean into the purple, overlapping them so they mix. A little bit of blue, a little bit of white, and really let the paintbrush dance. We work our way over there. We've got lots of yellows, so I'm picking up lots of oranges, so I'm picking up yellow and orange at the same time. Maybe angle my brush a little bit to lay some stronger marks on there. This area of the road is in shadow, so I'm using the muted grey with only a tiny weeny bit of white. If I just use the muted grey on its own, it'll look very flat, so a little bit of white, just a tiny weeny bit of white in there, gives it a little bit of dimension. Thinking about some flatter marks. And whilst that's still wet, let's get a little bit of contrast in there. So I'm using my brush a little bit flatter to the canvas. I'm trying really to get to the final, or as close to the final part of how we want it to look. Great, I'm going to continue up the pathway. We've got slightly different colours as we go up there, but I'm going to keep thinking wet in wet, painting it all blurry, and also trying to get contrast on top at the same time, as well as making it lighter. So I'm painting lots of layers all at the same time, angling my brush through different angles. So if it's flatter to the canvas, I'm laying the paint on without letting it mix. If I'm using it perpendicular, I'm blending a little bit more, and then stepping back to make sure it looks right. So let's step back. So the marks are really exciting, really quick, much smaller marks, and when we compare them with the marks up here, they're quite different. Now, does that matter? Then we want to make sure that they're all the same painting, but I'm not going to change what I'm doing. But what I might do, and what I will do, is I'm going to put a few strong marks of the orangey yellow into the foreground. And the same with the green. Of green, a little bit of white, just to mimic some of those brush marks that we have up there. And also, it's good to get a little bit more light in the foreground anyway. So slowing my energy down and really placing some similar marks to the ones that we have up there. Great, and that begins to feel a lot more like the same painting. So what a difference putting the pathway has made to the rest of the composition. You see how we're really pushing the eye in. It's given us those visual cues to make us understand what sort of distance that we're looking through when we're looking up here. So it's a really useful device. So I've been trying to create the same effect as this, just all at the same time. But you can see it still sinks a little bit, still gets a little bit darker. So I still think there's room for more light in that area. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to cover the rest of the area. Then when I put the light on, I can make sure that the light all goes on at the same time. So just to recap, this foreground area, either do it however you want to do it, or paint it all at the same time. So let that blend. Whilst it's still wet, put a little bit more texture on. Maybe layer up some more colour whilst you're going. And then you can go back to it later and bring in even more light and contrast. Okay, so the key thing here, so I'm going to start working over this side, is looking at different brush strokes, because we have different textures in the foreground here to the textures that we have in the foliage above ground. We have lots of lovely long lines. So I'm not going to swap brushes, I'm still going to use this brush. And what I'm going to start off with is still painting lots of smudgy colours, but whilst it's still wet, then I'm going to start pulling through some of those longer marks. That way, those longer marks are going to go into the paint whilst it's still wet, not create too high a contrast and look like it's seated or it's growing from within all of that foliage in the foreground. So I'm going to start off with painting a little bit of green down first, like the green that's underneath all of this tangled bracken and reeds. I think that might be the wrong green. Let's try a little bit of the other green. And let's take it in a little bit further than is visible, because now I'm going to pick up a little bit of white, let it mix a little bit, so picking up a little bit of the white, let it mix a little bit with the green that's already on my brush, and then using my brush perpendicular, I'm going to start pulling through some of those lovely long marks. Now I'm actually going to add a tiny weeny bit of the muted grey in there as well. So the muted grey with a little bit of the white. Now I don't want them to be too perfect, because again, this has got to all look like the same painting. So I'm increasing the pressure to create fatter ones occasionally, and I'm not letting them all run down to the same place, because it would look odd. That's not what's happening. We don't see a reed or a piece of bracken go all the way down to the ground. We might just see it stop there, or a little bit there, or maybe some that goes a little bit horizontal. And then any area that you're not happy with, that maybe has gone a little awry, we can just bring the green back in. So I'm just going to travel over sideways, a little bit of those greens. I'm picking up either green or both green and white and yellow on my brush. See, that's changed the colour a bit, so let's just go back in there and just put a bit more of that in. That green's in, so I'm going to get a little bit of my muted grey, I like that. Let it mix with some of the green that's already on my brush, and pop in some of those marks. In fact, let's not just restrict ourselves to the same mark. And I'm really just experimenting. I'm trying a few things out here, because I don't really know how I want it to look yet. And if it all looks pants, then of course we can just go back later and change it all. I'm trying not to go too much into the black, because you can see if I just start painting out into the black, well, what am I going to do about the spaces in between? They are too difficult to work in. So think laying down a little bit of green first, and then putting the texture in whilst it's still wet. step back. Okay, it looks slightly different rhythm to the rest of the painting, but don't worry, we have plans. Going back to the photograph, there's these lovely springy greens. So I'm taking a little bit of the permanent green deep, a little bit of white, and then it gives me this sort of lovely minty green. Putting these marks in after all of the long marks is just going to tie in the whole painting, much as we did over here. It's just going to take some of the energy out of those really tall, long marks and create something that looks maybe a little bit close to the photograph, but certainly brings it in with the rest of the painting. So I'm feeling the chaos. I'm trying to bring in some contrast and texture, whether that's with small marks or with those long marks. Let's step back and see what that chaotic turn has created. I think it really helps to give us that sort of density in the foreground. I think there could probably be a little bit more light as ever. We can always bring more light in, more layers of light, and perhaps even a little bit more. There's a sort of lovely warm yellow coming through there as well, so I might bring that in later, but at the moment I'm just going to stick with that. And I'm going to do something similar on the other side. I'm just going to think chaos. I'm just going to go through all of my colours a little at a time, thinking how they're mixing, so yellows into greens, maybe a little bit of orange into the yellows, and thinking about some of the marks that I'm making, still referring back to the photograph, and just seeing what comes out. Some of it wasn't working to begin with, so I put some of those marks that are very similar to the ones on top, just to bring it all together. And whilst it's not perfect, I'm very happy with it at the moment. So I do love a little bit of chaos and a little bit of make it up as you go along. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. So remember I resketched this lovely bright green sapling foliage here. So just adding this lovely zingy green behind the tree. Using the dark green to bring in some of those mini limbs. It's amazing what you can imply. So both there, here, it looks like that green continues behind the tree. That's a great little device. Now this is going to stretch out into this dark area here, and I'm going to start attacking it from this way, so we can make sure that this area really looks like it's overlapping. So simplifying again, we have, remember we resketched some of it over the top of the paint we did before. We have this lovely dark area that comes down. So again, simplifying, and we have this sort of darker green that comes up from the ground too. And in between, it's a little bit lighter. So notice how I keep using the words dark and light. I'm not too worried about the colour here. I just want to get the tones right. So nice and dark, nice and light, and then even lighter in the very, very distance. So that's going to give us a little bit of a reward as we look along the pathway. What is it that we're looking at? What can we see at the end? And let's bring a little bit of pale green coming from this side. They've joined into one, so let's make one paler than the other. And I think let's make this one slightly paler. Let's not get too detailed. A little bit of bluey green here, just because I love bluey greens to help me look into the distance. So that's a little bit of the blue we've been using, manganese blue, and a little bit of the permanent green light. So a nice bluey green, that's really helping us travel into the distance. I'm just creating another light colour here just to show the slope of the grass. Let's match it the other side. What we want to make sure is that either side of this shadow remains dark. So the shadow, let's put the dark green either side there, and let's just keep that dark. So I'm just going to continue with that distant area now on the right hand side. I don't want to bring too much detail in, so I'm still going to try and keep those marks fairly big so we get that illusion of that being much further away. So that's the foreground all done. So just to recap, we combined the process that I did up there with the 2 layers. This time we did both layers at the same time. So letting it mix a little bit, getting some blur, but also putting some stronger colour, maybe using a bit of more of a flat of the brush to create a little bit of contrast and develop the light in the foreground. Played with brush marks, so trying lots of different brush marks, trying them on for size on the canvas, because sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. But it's better that we have that experimentation, I think, on the canvas, and we can always go over if it doesn't quite work. Also, if you don't try, you're not going to know what it looks like on the canvas. You can practice on another canvas, but it has to be in context for you to be able to decide, yeah, that works, or it doesn't really work. Great thing is you can just keep going and keep going over it if it isn't quite working for you. We introduced purple, so we used muted grey in order to get some of those lovely purpley, bluey colours in the foreground on the path, and working in that distance area, tried to make sure we didn't get too much detail in there, but just enough light and layering, contrasts of dark and light, in order to give us that sense that everything is moving off into the distance. So that's the canvas covered, and now it's a case of let's step back and think about what we might want to change. And actually, sometimes it's quite good to leave the painting overnight. So when you come back in the morning, you've got fresh eyes and you can take the painting by surprise and then go, oh yeah, that needs changing, that needs to go, or that needs to be lighter. So I hope you've enjoyed following the process of how to paint a treescape. I hope you've had a good chance to give it a go yourself. If not during, I hope now you've watched them all, you'll go away and give it a little bit of a go.